Hey everybody, here's just a few slides that I put together to illustrate the linear model of communication and the transactional model of communication that's brought up in your Lucas text. And I put this together really just to highlight some of the differences between the two models. And hopefully you'll start to see the interdependent nature by the end of my short little video clip here. So what is communication? Well, at the beginning of the 20th century, scholars sort of looked at communication as following a linear process. In other words, just like in Lucas, there were speakers, there were listeners, there were channels, which were the physical means of sending information, and messages, right? Symbols that we put together to convey some information to someone else. And there was also noise. This is anything that disrupts the process. And basically, you can almost think of this like a radio tower. Communication sort of just flows in one direction from a speaker to a listener. And there's not a whole lot else. But as we moved later into the 20th century, we started having a more sophisticated view of what communication actually is. So what's changed here? Well, what's changed is we now have a very person-centered approach to communication. So we're introducing a new term here that's called frame of reference. This is your unique view of the world and everything in it, based on the sum total of your life experiences. So we have two people here, two fictitious persons. One name is Jeff and the other is Shauna. Jeff is 25, Shauna is 34, different ethnicity, different gender, different work experiences, different upbringing. So we now understand that people approach communication from different perspectives. So we're moving toward a transactional model of communication. In spite of our differences, we hold some aspects of our frame of reference in common. So for instance, they are both English-speaking North Americans. They're both partners in a chemistry class. They say they share similar personality traits, and they both have a family member serving in the military. So there are some areas where their frames of difference are quite different, and then there are some areas where their frames of reference overlap. And this overlap is what makes communication possible. So this is a definition of communication that has served me quite well, whether we're communicating with our voices or whether we're communicating with our bodies. Communication is an interdependent process of sending, receiving, and understanding messages. So in this hypothetical example here, remember they both have the same classroom experience. They're both in a chemistry class. Jeff happened to miss a lecture session and he wants to know, hey, what did I miss in lecture? Now at this point, Jeff is encoding a message. He's putting it together in his mind, right, this message, using symbols that he's confident that Shauna is going to be able to understand. At which point, she decodes the message. She makes sense of it, drawing from her frame of reference, the sum total of her life experience. And at this point, she gives feedback. Okay, read up on the valence shell of electrons. That's her reply message. And notice the channel for both the sending message and the reply message are voice. There is also an ambulance that happens to be going by at the time, causing some external noise. All right, now all communication occurs within some kind of situation, some kind of surroundings. In this case, we're looking at physical surroundings. All communication happens within a context. So in this case, it was in a hallway on campus. Maybe a hallway quite similar to the one we have outside of class. So communication is an interdependent process of sending, receiving, and understanding messages. So what do we mean by interdependent? What this means is you can change any one piece of this model and everything else in the model will change along with it. So, for example, if we have a different set of noises, we now have static from the phone. Or suppose they changed a channel, right? And they're speaking on the phone. Well, that's going to change the way that Jeff encodes and decodes messages, which changes the message, which may change the channel choice, or it may modify the channel in some way. So if you change one piece of this model, everything else in the model changes to. So what happens if we change the background here? Well, now I put our background in a lecture hall. And you know the physical situation is much different. And as a result of that, we have different associations, both for Shauna and for Jeff. This might mean that they choose a different channel. Maybe they send each other a text message instead of speaking. Maybe they send an email. Maybe they have to modify the channel and whisper to each other a little bit. This may also change the message. Yeah, if we're using a different channel, say like texting, we might use abbreviated characters. All right, so that's an example of how the channel itself is going to change the message in some way. It's going to change the way that messages are understood too, because we have different associations with the physical setting. This is going to change the way we encode messages. This might change the way we decode messages. And lastly, I changed the situation one more time. This time it's in a bowling alley. Now, both persons have different associations with bowling alleys. Maybe they had birthday parties there as a kid, maybe dates. So they have many different associations with this situation, which is, again, going to lead to different encoding, to a different message. The message is understood differently because it's influenced by the situation itself. So you can sort of see these falling like dominoes. If you change one piece in the model, everything else in the model changes with it. That's what we mean by interdependent. It doesn't make any sense to look at any one of these pieces of the transactional model by itself. So this is probably the biggest difference between the linear model and the transactional model. All these pieces are linked together, sort of like a spider web. If you change one piece, everything else in the model changes with it. So that's what I have to say about the transactional model of communication. I've opened up a little discussion forum where I ask you to think about an encounter that you've had and how the transactional model could be applied.